Simon Donner is a UBC professor researching climate science and public policy. Lead author of the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report, he co-chairs Canada's Net Zero Advisory Body and directs UBC's Climate Solutions Research Collective, guiding pathways to net zero emissions.
Thanks so much. I'll just tell you a little bit, no slides for this. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what I do and what we do. So I'm a climate scientist at the University of British Columbia. I've been doing this. I've been working here for 18 years. And so I teach classes about climate change, science, and policy, and I do research in the area. And for the past 4.5 years, I've been a member of Canada's Net Zero Advisory Body, and I'm now the chair of it or co-chair of it. And the Net Zero Advisory Body was created back in 2021 when the government passed the Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, which was basically the legislation that said Canada has a long-term target of getting emissions to zero or to net zero and of greenhouse gas emissions. And also that said that we need to have targets every 5 years and the government needs to set them. Now, legislation cannot force the government to meet these targets because it's not something, to be honest, that the federal government on its own can control. But it creates more of an infrastructure around it. And so as part of that, they created an advisory body that's a group of outsiders who are supposed to give independent advice to the government on how to get there. And then they asked me to be on the advisory body, so I've been a part of it since then. And what I appreciate about they don't always take our advice. Now, granted, nobody elected us, so that's okay. But what I appreciate about the process and the opportunity is that so often climate action people boil it down simply to reducing emissions. And obviously, that's the key thing we need to do. If we can get emissions to zero or net zero, the planet will stop warming, and the impacts will stop increasing. But we have to get there in a way that is sustainable, right? That's equitable, that has the right environmental outcomes, has the right economic outcomes, et cetera. And so that's the advice we give.
So the first question is, now, given your research on ocean warming and atmospheric changes, what are the hidden or direct ways our current transport system impacts marine and atmospheric health? And how should these influence sustainable transport planning?
Well, thanks for the question, Obi, and it's really a treat to be here honestly, for me to hear what everyone else has to say. In terms of the climate impact of marine and the atmospheric impact of transportation, most of it, the vast majority of it comes down to the fact that most of our transportation historically since the mid 1800s is based on burning fuel, right? So it's burning gasoline, oil, diesel, et cetera. And the combustion process puts out both pollutants that lead to warming, carbon dioxide, but also air pollutants as well. And the thing is that the air pollutants that we experience that affect human health, they also affect environmental health. So a really basic way to think about it is, like what we call smog or ground level ozone, right? I mean, ozone's also bad for plants, right? When plants try to bring CO2 in from the air to help them do photosynthesis. If there's ozone in the air, they're also bringing the ozone into their leaves, right? So you're basically the same things that are causing human health risks from burning fossil fuels, whether it's in the back of a car or back of a bus, are contributing to environmental damage as well. And that's seen. You can see that in the atmosphere. You can see that with plants. You can see it in the ocean. And so, I mean, the number one solution then that the world is looking towards is obviously getting off of vehicles that depend on using fossil fuels. But I'm going to add, and we all know this, right? Everybody here on this panel knows this. I'm going to add one thing that might be a little bit less obvious and isn't talked about a lot. I mean, obviously, the main alternative is shifting to electric vehicles, right? And but one thing, if you dig into like the economic models and about what the future would look like if we were going towards a low carbon future and shifting towards electric vehicles, is in those projections, it's not just that the world shifts to electric vehicles, it's that vehicle ownership goes down because there's a recognition there's more public transit, there's more shared vehicle usage. My family does not actually own a car. We belong to a co-op here in Vancouver which we drive electric vehicles through. And I think that's the piece that's part of sustainable transportation that people miss. It's not about taking every vehicle on the road and replacing with an electric version, but it's coming up with more efficient ways for everyone to get around, which will also be a lot cheaper and will also have much smaller footprint on the planet because of the mining that's necessary for batteries. I mean, we need to think about how, let's try to be efficient with the number of vehicles that are necessary. That's the main thing to say, and I'll just quickly add that, of course, shifting to electric vehicles means relying on more electricity, and electricity can also, whether it's from coal or natural gas, contribute to climate change and air pollution. That's where Canada has a huge advantage, is we have one of the lowest carbon electricity grids in the world. Ontario's fairly low carbon, though it does rely on natural gas. We're almost entirely no carbon here in British Columbia, and it's a big opportunity for Canada that we should be taking advantage of.
Interesting. Thanks, Simon. That was very informative. So I do agree. The solution is not just changing to electric vehicles. It's the planning of it. It's the efficient usage of it, using it when necessary, right? Not just because it's available, right? Because, like you said, there's the mining of it, and there's pollution happening, and there's the battery repair and storage, and the dispose.
Absolutely.
There's a lot around that. So thank you very much. As a science communicator and an educator, okay, what strategies do you believe are most effective for translating complex climate data into public motivation so that's to shift transport behavior from awareness to sustained action?
No, thanks for that, Obi. And I think actually to answer this, I'm going to build a little bit on some of what Gabriel just said. Obviously, my background is in science. I studied math and physics for years, and so this is going to sound like a strange comment from someone who did that and then worked in the area of climate science for years. But I think the mistake many of us make in my line of work is we talk about climate change actually too much. That we try to use to say that reducing the impacts of climate change is like the sole motivation for making a transportation behavior decision, and it doesn't make sense to most people, right? Um, with communication in any realm of life, you need to think about the people you're talking to. You need to think about your audience, right? And so there are two things that I always pay attention to in doing communication about whether it's shifting transport behavior or shifting like how you heat and cool your home, like all these different things that are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, is that it works out that most of these actions are good ideas for other reasons as well. So the first thing that we really focus on is the data around the kind of what people in what used to always call co-benefits, right? That for the most parts of the sustainable transportation behaviors, they don't just reduce emissions, they're healthier. We've talked about that, right? So about this, reducing air pollution. There also can be physically healthier if it involves walking, cycling, etc. The other thing is that most of these sustainable transportation behaviors, whether it means using public transit or shifting to an electric vehicle, they're cheaper. Now, there might be a greater upfront cost, which is a real issue, but if you amortize it over time, it's cheaper to buy an electric vehicle as long as you keep it for long enough, right? And I mean, if you think about it, I'm from Toronto originally as well, uh, and the biggest climate action probably in Canadian history was Ontario shutting down the coal burning power plants. And it was not done because of climate change. It was done because of air pollution. And I think there's a lesson for Canadians in that. And so part of it is talking about code benefits. The other piece is, Gabriel was talking about sort of lowering the barriers a little bit to making people feel comfortable using public transit. Um, that that's obviously something you're not quite doing in the communication part, but but part of the, I think that's important to highlight in the communication is some of these is to try to communicate that the barriers aren't as high as they seem to be, right? And so one of the things I can say, just having driven electric vehicles on and off for years, is that it's much easier to charge them than people think. I mean, it depends a little bit where you are in the country, to be honest, but it is much easier to charge them than people expect. and they, for the most part, are quieter and more pleasant vehicles to drive. Right. And so I think like that doesn't get communicated as much. In the same way, it's just like communicating that like that's, I've been cycling to work or school since I was 17, since going to high school in Toronto. And so I'm willing to cycle to work or to school, back in the day, regardless of the quality of the bike lanes. Because I just used to bike on every street in Toronto when back before there were any bike lanes really. But now the cycling infrastructure is increasing so much in our cities, and I know there's a big fight about it, obviously in Ontario. Um, it's just a lot safer and easier than things used to be. And what strikes me, at least here in Vancouver, and a little bit when I'm back visiting, is that it's often a faster way to get places, right? And that's a piece that's not communicated, right? And so when I talk about these things with anyone who's a little bit reluctant, I don't focus on the climate side. We just talk about what are the other benefits. So,
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Simon. So I'm in agreement with you. If you focus on climate change, you get the climate denial, the people that are saying it's not happening, and then it turns the conversation to something else, right?
yeah,
And
that's hard for me as a scientist, but I give in on you don't have to win that fight every day.
no, but what you said is really good, and that's connecting it to, bringing in the social aspect of things, right?
Yeah.
The barrier reduction, the co-benefit of it, and the fact that it takes you to places faster, right? Because, with bikes, you just cut through the traffic, the lanes is not, so it's yes, so totally in agreement. In your experience, what are the most impactful ways to engage local communities in adopting sustainable transport practices beyond raising awareness?
No, thanks for asking. I feel like in many ways it's a question better asked of our other panelists, as I'm somebody that most of my work is either doing the research or trying to raise awareness. But I'll comment on a couple things that I find have been just sort of really valuable over the years. Um, I think when you look at like polling data across Canada, and there's some variance across the country, but it's fairly standard that like most Canadians actually are like concerned about climate change and sustainability. 80% or so will say they care about it. What happens is when it comes down to ranking it against other pressures in life, it's often for most people not going to be ranked very high, right? So we care about it, but there are other pressing things that get in the way. It's about affordability, right? It's about making sure, it's about affordability. It's like family issues, et cetera. All these other things end up coming first, right? Which is fair, right? And so the problem is that most people are keen to do the thing and take action, particularly with in terms of transport, that would be more sustainable, but the incentive structure isn't set the right way. It's too hard. There's too many obstacles, right? Whether it's like what Gabriel's talking about is like, there's just nowhere to sit at the SkyTrain stations in Vancouver. There's no benches, right? Um, whether it's that or it's simply like the cost is too high, right? And so, for example, like and right now, like we're going through this at a federal and at a provincial level, where the government for years had been providing support to people to buy electric vehicles. Now, I think there's a lot of pros and cons to the rebate approach because it's still electric vehicles are still expensive, so it's not clear that that's really a subsidy that's helping people with low incomes get into an electric vehicle, right? But the point being, like the government's put that on pause, right? And meanwhile, they're talking about all sorts of other issues, and so it's unclear what the federal government's going to choose, both about the rebates and about what kind of the standard to set for the country about what electric vehicle update in sales should be. And why is that? Why are they able to do that? Is because they're not hearing from Canadians about it. They're hearing from Canadians about other issues, right? And so one of the things, like when we talk about raising awareness, like when I'm speaking, whether it's to students here at the university or whether it's to folks through my federal work or everything, I mean, so much of the goal of raising the awareness is to get more people to communicate to their city councilors, to their provincial officials or federal officials, right? And so it's not just about raising the awareness so that you will make a decision. but it's to say that like the decisions are too hard for the individual person to make, right? The incentives aren't set right. And we need government help to set the incentives. And so what we really need to be doing is convincing people the value of on your own or collectively, you know, communicating with and or lobbying your representatives, because that's what's going to set the tone for so many of these things. I mean, right now we have the federal government talking about investing in major projects across the country, right? Where's the public transit projects? They're not on the list, right? There's a train line here in Vancouver that would be coming to my university that everyone's waiting for the money for. Why not choose that, right? Like, yeah, so
I hear you, Simon. Really, it's how do we get people like when because they do put out information like okay, consultation, right? They do put out consultation
yeah,
requests, right, regarding trying to decide okay, where to go forward. And I guess it's for us to participate in that consultation process so that they hear and say that this is what's important to us. And if we're not doing
yeah.
that, then they won't pick it up. You know, they will
And I
go
don't
for
want to cut into anyone's time, but I'll just say they
yeah.
have to do it before the consultation because the problem is the consultation's too late, usually too late. The
Yeah,
decision's
because
already in
just have already
process.
made. Right, I hear you. So it's like how will now it be now be implemented? You're so correct.
Yeah.
That's so true. Yeah, that's thank you.